There you go.
That's great. I thank you very much. And I will open this session of the Bridgewater Town Council Rules and Procedures Committee. My name is Fred Chase. I'm acting as chairman, and we have a quorum consisting of myself and Councilor Frank Souza. We may have an additional councilor join us. Hopefully we will, but nonetheless, we can begin to proceed. I know that together with us as a guest is Councilor Eric Moore, who is the proponent of the legislation that we will consider this evening. I've neglected to indicate the date. Today is Thursday, July 28th. So what is before us is on recommendation, on referral, I should say, from the Town Council, proposed ordinance FY 22-025, General Ordinance, Chapter 50, Buildings, Article 2, the naming of town buildings and facilities. I would suggest that without exception, if Councilor Moore, if you feel able and willing to offer any introductory comments, they would be welcome.
Thank you, President Chase. So maybe just first some background on where this even came from. Maybe a few months back, a resident approached me and asked me what the process was for renaming the old high school. And so at the time I didn't know, so I started looking into it. And I thought, maybe Bridgewater had a process, or maybe the school committee did. I learned that Bridgewater does not have a process for formally naming our buildings. And the school committee does, but that their process only applies to buildings that they own, which is the high school. The rest of the buildings, at least in Bridgewater, I believe in Rainham too, are owned by the town and leased back. And so the town retains the naming rights there. So when this was happening, I sort of reached out, and it was suggested that I actually create a policy that could help clarify the process here and the procedure that somebody would go through to request a name, and also for the town to decision the name. And so this is my attempt at doing that. I went out and did some research. I looked at other towns, cities, and even states across the country. And there seem to be these sort of two approaches. One is the one that I'll describe in a minute. It's the one that's ahead of us, in front of us, where somebody submits through the administrative branch, and then it gets presented to the council for a decision. And there is another process that is not recommended here, but just for awareness, where it would go to a committee, and the committee would review it and decision it. And so I thought, just as a first step for our town, it might make more sense for us to just channel it through the town manager, so that the town council could make a decision. And that's what you see in front of you. And so the actual wording here tries to clarify what town assets can be named. It ranges from buildings to streets. The only thing I think that's actually in front of us is buildings. So if you decided to shorten the scope, I think that would be fine too. And then it suggests that anyone who has an idea for naming a building would fill out a form, and it names some things like application date and address. They would submit that to the town manager. The town manager would do some research, including what it would cost and any other considerations, and then would present it to the council. The council would then, in the next meeting, decision that. And the reason for the next meeting is it gives people from the town the opportunity to weigh in for or against the naming suggestion. And maybe just one last thing to call out. One thing that I specifically stated in here is that if it's named after a person, the person should be non-living, unless that person has actually essentially funded the building. And that seems to also be a standard practice. And the reason for non-living that's often cited is if somebody happens to do something negative while they're still alive, You have the risk of someone who was once honored not being honored anymore, but still having buildings. And then the other is the concern over just sort of unfair influence. You can imagine if someone that was living in town and their name is on the main building and they endorse a political candidate or suggest something in town, it might bear more weight than maybe it should. And so that's really kind of the big consideration that I found in the other ones. And then many others also suggested just other criteria for a good name, like something that is of local importance, something that's regional, something that is not obscene, those sorts of things. So I did my best to try to capture that in this language.
Okay, thank you. I would suggest, Frank, if you would agree, I would suggest that if you or I have questions, and we can begin with you, before we really get into voicing any particular opinions on it. But if you have questions for Eric, I think you should certainly proceed
I
now.
do. First of all, I've been able to read much better lately, more than 5 minutes on the computer. So I did read the whole thing this afternoon, but I did see something in there about parks and other things other than the buildings.
Yeah,
The reason I'm asking is, like, I know our ballpark downtown, they named the different fields and some of them are named after people who are still alive.
yeah. And so I included this mostly because I saw that other towns did. But it's not, out of all the areas, it's actually not one that I researched quite as much as the buildings and the large value things. But it does, I think it probably has the same considerations where if somebody, let's say, wanted to rename, I don't know, the Scotland Fields softball fields, and they named it after a prominent local presence or personality, you could imagine that's probably something we would want the town residents to participate in and maybe have some conversation about. It's not intended to, sort of limit Bridgewater Little League from being able to, remember somebody in the group or any of that stuff. It's, at least for me, my intention is more with like the large facilities in town.
I know the guy had served many, many years as a coach and stuff for the teams and everything else, and did a great deal for the sports team. So I think that's why they named the field, one of the fields down there, after him. So that's okay with me. I have no qualms about that. Okay, that's it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Frank. I think for myself, I did have a few questions. Is there a particular town that you might have looked to for drafting of the proposed ordinance? Any one more so than another, or any town that we might be familiar with, or?
Yeah, I can go back. I can send you some links as a follow-up. So I do know that it's not necessarily a town, but the city of Anchorage, Alaska, probably had the best policy that I saw. And it was many pages, but it really went through, what a name could be, what it couldn't be, the process for delivering it. And I can send a link to that. I think I got that through the Munich, I think it's Municode website. That was a really good one. There was another local one that some of the actual language is borrowed from. I might have to get back to you on that, if that's okay. But there are, I can, as a follow-up, send a link to 3 or 4 that I looked at.
So to some extent, it is comprised, what you proposed is comprised of different sources.
It is,
yeah. Is that accurate?
It is, and I tried to blend a few because many of the sources also referenced or included formal policies around sponsorship. So let's say we put a stadium or something in town and we wanted a company to actually pay for a presence there. So I didn't think that was applicable to us. So I tried to strip out the language about sponsored naming activities. and just keep it to the sort of, community sponsored naming activities with a decision process. So this isn't a one-for-one from any other town. It was me trying to pull together pieces from a few different examples.
Okay, thank you. I asked, pardon me. I asked, I think primarily because I did note some inconsistencies, and it seemed that maybe there were, more than one source that had been relied upon, but that's kind of getting into the nitty gritty a little bit at this point. But now, and you mentioned the school, and I thought you had previously mentioned that that was somewhat of a motivating factor in bringing this forward. And I know that we very briefly at our last council meeting touched on schools in this regard. And the only reason I say that is that it seems to me that we might be running up against a difficulty there. I think that the school committee itself is an autonomous body, and I'm a little reticent when it comes to matters that arguably may fall within their purview. Now, you mentioned that they don't have a policy that speaks to the naming of assets, I guess, that are not their own properties. I understand that. We do have a lease. And actually, I think that's a subject that in a slightly different matter is going to come up before the council. Some proposed edits to that lease. I think first we would have to consider, any adoption of any ordinance in this regard with a view toward that lease. And I think we would have to give serious consideration to whether we may be inadvertently infringing upon the area that is properly within the scope of the school committee when it comes to school buildings. Now, it strikes me too that there aren't a lot of facilities in town that might be suitable for consideration of naming. We don't expect that the old town hall is going to be renamed. Certainly the memorial building, I don't expect that anyone is going to propose naming for that. There could be other candidates, I'll grant you, and maybe something in the nature of a park or some other town building. But I don't know that, with the possible exception of the old high school, I don't know that anyone is clamoring for assets of the town to be named. Now, I do recognize that it's a common practice for towns to do this to some extent, and I think that it can be a very unifying thing for the town when people can come together to, as it were, nominate a property to be named in someone's honor. I just don't know if it is something that necessitates an ordinance. Now, that said, if we were to consider an ordinance to do that, and you made reference to the two kind of schools of thought out there, I think personally that I'm more favorable toward the notion of a committee for that purpose, whether it's an ad hoc committee or some standing committee that actually has this as a delegated function. Something in the nature of like the Citizens Advisory Committee, comprised of people from different parts of the town. In other words, from town management or from, volunteers, members of the public, maybe someone from the, from the council or otherwise. But the reason I say that is I think that given what your proposal would do, and you just made reference to this a little earlier, that the town manager would be proposed to be the person responsible for the initial vetting and a lot of the preliminary work, and then delivering to the council a proposed order at that point, I guess, to name a facility. That would give the public, much like much of our legislation, just two, fairly brief opportunities to engage on that subject. The first session when it's introduced, and arguably 2 weeks later when it's voted upon as a final matter. And I think that the concept of naming something in perpetuity in someone's honor, there's a certain gravity to that, a certain I think we have to take a step back and really think about it. And in your remarks, I know you do, for example, when you made reference to the fact that it's commonly not the case that a facility or a building might be named in honor of a living person. Yes, I can understand that. And you made the case. Someone might run afoul of the law, or might run into some other kind of situation that would be embarrassing and might reflect poorly on the town. But I think that overall, I think that there really would be a need for some fairly substantial citizen input, maybe not to the degree of our charter changes, that took well over a year of dedication by a group of people on an ad hoc basis, but I certainly think something more in depth than just a meeting or two that during which the public would have a chance to weigh in, by comments. So I'd rather see something a little more substantial, with more opportunity for citizens to actually engage in the vetting, than to just rely upon the town manager in that regard. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love the idea. I think my overall intention here is, I think, to accomplish the same goal that you talked about. I think, in full disclosure, a school is named after my grandfather, so it is a source of pride for our family, and I think the community chose to do that out of respect for what he had done. And so I don't think it's something that should be able to happen quickly, or sort of even shift with political tides in a town. And so what I'm really trying to do with this is make sure that level of diligence and input and like real thought goes into that. And so I would certainly support the committee approach as well. And I appreciate and value the comments you said on 1 week probably isn't enough. I think you're absolutely right. I think hearing that, it is something that should take some work to do. It kind of in reference to the school, one of the challenges with the process there, and I think something we would just want to enforce with what we just said, is they can vote not to follow the policy, and they have. And so they can suspend the policy, name a building, and then reenact the policy. And that's been done in the past. So I think if just purely for the things in Bridgewater that our residents see every day, that we pay for, I just want to see some level of diligence and community involvement before the decision is made. That's really the driver. So I think if there was another vehicle to do that, or sort of a modification to this that both of you thought might be relevant way to do that, or maybe a rethinking of this, I would be open to all of that.
Well, I think that, again, my initial inclination was, do we really need it? But frankly, I would have to defer to what you've done, because I think that just because it's something that I hadn't necessarily contemplated, doesn't mean that it's something that we shouldn't prepare for. I think that, the example you found, again, I did have particular, very kind of nitty gritty problems with some of the language, largely because I found some of it was rather inconsistent, and that's why I asked you about that. But I certainly laud you for bringing this forward, and I think that my hunch is, at least, that there might be more, broader reception to the whole concept if it's something that the council sees is, open to a wider body for input, such as the committee notion that we were talking about. Frank, do you have any particular comments on what I've been saying, or?
No,
otherwise?
I think you might be in the right direction. Okay, open it up to more. And how do we do that? Do we put together an amendment? Do we tonight say, well, we're going to go back and just look at it and work with Eric for an amendment to take what he has, because he's done a lot of work and there's a lot of it in there. Okay. And maybe instead of the process of the town manager and the council, we switch that part out for a committee. But we've got to be a little more specific and just say committee. Okay. What does Eric think about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to take another stab at it and go. I do have examples of the committee path too.
Because we
Like,
can
for
do
instance,
that. We don't
yeah.
have to make a decision this evening. We could, just say, hold it here at the committee level, and we're going to be working with Eric on rewriting part of it, and then send it back to the council with the amendment.
Yeah, that would be great. And then I could take a stab offline of maybe making some changes to bring back before this committee in the next meeting.
Yeah, it'll be the September meeting, because we only got one meeting this month.
Yeah, I think, frankly, Eric, in my opinion, if you were to try to incorporate that whole sort of committee notion, in place of the procedure as it's laid out in that section, I think that would, improve a lot of this in my mind. And of course, you could expound upon what you would propose the committee to be consistent of. Who from the public, or what number of people, or whatever you think is appropriate. But I do just think that is, we hate to get bogged down with so many boards and committees and things, but frankly, it's sometimes the only way to really thoroughly vet some question and totally have confidence that the community is really drawn in. That can go overboard. Now, again, in the case of the charter committee, I think that was necessary, and it just took a long time. Look at the zoning recodification process. Look at the master plan, and all the many months that went into the development of that. But I think that at the end of it, when we have a result that at least we are confident has, captured a good cross section of the community, that then we can feel better about it, and I think people would be more confident in voicing support for it. That's sort of my sense. My only other concern is, as I mentioned, I do have concerns about the schools being incorporated in it, only to the extent that I think we'd have to really very carefully consider the purview of the school committee over that, because they are an autonomous body, and we do try to give them a wide berth. I think appropriately so. They come to us every year, to identify their budget, to explain their budget to us, and sure, we do have budgetary, approval control with respect to that, but we don't do a line item kind of, analysis of it. We know they've done that. We can always attend their meetings as citizens and question them as to every line item. But when it reaches the council, that's just an example of something that, we kind of take as, well, here's the school committee's, budget. Basically, can we afford it? Something we can live with? And then we vote it. And I think for even matters that otherwise might fall under their penumbra, I think we do have to be careful that we maintain the appropriate delineation of our roles. And so that's my only sort of, overriding concern about schools in this context.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think, even part of the process could be, the school is involved in the naming of schools. I think that would be great, actually. And I think just making sure that there is a policy that forces the same level of rigor, and that there's agreement that that policy would be followed, I think could get us there. But yeah, I agree. I think, their guidance is critical on the schools. We need to find a way to make that part of the process.
Yeah, myself, I think because we're two towns plus the joint committee, if we're using committee people in Bridgewater, then it should be Bridgewater representatives on the school committee that we're looking at. No sense going to the Rainham, people. You don't need superintendent. Okay. But if it's the committee you're looking for, then let the portion of the committee that's made up of the Bridgewater representatives look at the Bridgewater schools. When it comes to the joint, well, the high school's the only one in town that the town itself doesn't own. So that's my opinion on that.
Well, honestly, I think I have nothing further to ask or suggest for myself at this point. Eric, if you'd want to consider the changes, then it's up to you. You might ask that we vote to just continue this and take it up again when you have amendments.
Yeah, I think that would be appreciated. And I appreciate the guidance on this. So if you would be willing to continue it, I can bring something back at the next meeting.
Okay, I'll make
Okay.
that motion.
Well, thank you, and I'll second that. So the motion is to continue this for the committee work. In other words, that we at the next committee meeting that we scheduled.
Yes.
Yeah, and say the committee
Okay.
will be working with the sponsor.
Yes.
Eric.
Okay. All right. So I would certainly vote in favor of that. And Frank.
Yes.
Okay. So that's unanimous. And I think that's a good result. Honestly.
Mhm.
And it sounds like it might get Frank out the door to get down to the music early. I don't know.
Perfect.
But well, we have no public in attendance this evening. I'm sorry to say, but are there any other questions or issues relative to this that we need to address?
Nope.
I believe so.
I'm hearing none. Okay, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. And second, and all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And it is unanimous. And I thank everyone. I think that was actually quite productive, and I appreciate all your help.
I think we're on the road in the right direction. I think we'll come up with something really good.
Yeah.
I think
Thank you,
so.
Eric. And
Good.
everyone
Thank
else.
you both.
Thank you.
Have
Appreciate
a good
it.
night, everybody.
Good night.
Night.
Good night, Debbie, and thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Frank.
Aye.
Bye-bye.